Army trash. My father's words sliced through the applause at my own retirement party. The room froze. Humiliation burned through me as every eye turned. Then, Director Vance stepped forward, handing me a classified file. Inside were photos of my father shaking hands with our enemies, a week before my first deployment. Betrayal upon betrayal. My own father profited from the war that nearly killed me. I felt my world shatter, but a fierce resolve ignited. This wasn't over. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is Michael Harper, and I'm 34 years old. Each morning I walk the grounds of our family estate, watching dawn creep across 12 generations of Harper success built into Collins Defense Systems. My father, Jack, the CEO, still keeps my childhood room like a shrine to the corporate heir I was supposed to become. Instead, I chose Army fatigues over Italian suits, dog tags over stock options, earning my rank through 4 deployments. The invitation to my retirement ceremony sits on my desk, Director Thomas Vance's RSVP catching my eye, the same man whose audit request made Dad's face darken years ago. My shoulders tighten as I trace the old .gov email address. A soldier learns to trust his instincts, and something about this feels like a tripwire. One legacy ends before another ignites. But let me start from the beginning. The retirement ceremony was held in our estate's grand ballroom, all polished marble and crystal chandeliers that had witnessed countless Harper celebrations. I stood ramrod straight in my dress blues, the weight of medals and ribbons familiar against my chest. Fellow soldiers mingled awkwardly with CDS executives in $1,000 suits, like oil trying to mix with water. You know that feeling when you're scanning a crowd, pretending not to look for someone specific? That was me, tracking Dad's movements through the sea of guests. He kept to the edges, nursing his scotch, avoiding direct eye contact. Mom, though, she was in her element, floating between groups with that practiced society smile, touching elbows and laughing at just the right moments. Michael? She caught me in a quick hug, her perfume bringing back memories of childhood Sunday dinners. Everything's perfect, isn't it? Just look at all these people here to honor you. I nodded, returning her smile while my eyes drifted to Dad again. He'd positioned himself near the bar, back turned to the ceremony setup. The sight triggered a flash of an old memory. Me at 12, winning a wrestling tournament, searching the bleachers for his face that never showed. The master of ceremonies called for attention, and guests drifted toward their seats. I took my place at the front, shoulders squared, chin level. This was supposed to be my moment, 12 years of service coming to a dignified close. Then I spotted Director Thomas Vance slipping in through a side door, and something in my gut tightened. The ceremony proceeded according to protocol. Speeches, handshakes, the familiar rhythm of military tradition. When Vance approached the podium, his presence commanded immediate attention. He spoke briefly about dedication and sacrifice, then produced a small box. "Senior Master Sergeant Harper," he said, his voice carrying clear authority, "for exemplary service and unwavering integrity, I present this special commendation." The medal gleamed as he pinned it to my chest. I maintained my bearing, but inside, pride warred with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. That's when Dad's voice cut through the applause like a blade. Another thank you plaque for turning my heir into Army trash. The words landed like a grenade in the middle of the room. Conversations died. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Mom's society smile cracked and fell away. I felt the heat of every stare toggle between Dad and me, waiting for the explosion. My training kicked in. Face neutral, posture rigid, emotions locked down tight. But inside? Inside, I was that 12-year-old kid again, clutching a wrestling trophy nobody cared about. Director Vance turned slowly, deliberately, toward my father. His calm felt dangerous somehow, like the stillness before an ambush. "You declined my audit invitation in '03, Jack," he said, voice mild but carrying. "Curious timing. Those missing munitions contracts." Dad's fingers whitened around his lowball glass. For a split second, I thought he might throw it. Instead, he set it down with exaggerated care and stalked out of the ballroom. The party dissolved quickly after that, guests making polite excuses while avoiding eye contact. Mom disappeared to lie down with a headache. I escaped to the terrace, letting the cool night air wash over me. The stars were out, same ones I'd watched over Baghdad, over Kandahar, over a dozen forward operating bases where integrity wasn't just a corporate buzzword. "Sergeant Harper." I turned to find Director Vance standing there, holding a manila envelope marked with red classification stamps. "This belongs to you now," he said quietly, extending the file. "Class of 2003. I think you'll find it illuminating." He left me there with the envelope heavy in my hands, its contents already burning through the paper like acid through armor. I retreated to my old bedroom, the one place in this mansion that still felt halfway real. Everything was preserved exactly as I'd left it. Wrestling trophies, model planes, even my first set of combat boots by the closet. The familiarity should have been comforting. It wasn't. My hands shook slightly as I broke the envelope's seal. The first thing that slid out was a photograph, black and white but crystal clear. Dad stood in what looked like a hotel suite, wearing one of his signature tailored suits, shaking hands with a man I recognized from intelligence briefings, Hassan al-Rashidi, a known Iraqi weapons trafficker. My stomach lurched at the date stamp, March 16th, 2003, 1 week. 1 goddamn week before I deployed for the first time. You ever have one of those moments where your whole world shifts sideways, where everything you thought you knew suddenly feels like a lie? That's what hit me as I stared at that photo, my father's confident smile frozen in time while he dealt with the very people I was being sent to fight. The documents underneath were worse. Page after page of munitions transfers, all tied to CDS contracts, but with blank origin fields. The patterns were obvious even to someone without financial training. Weapons moving through shell companies, serial numbers disappearing into thin air, massive payments routed through offshore accounts. I had to sit down on my old bed, the springs creaking in familiar protest. The same bed I'd laid in that last night before shipping out, full of pride and purpose. Now I wondered how many of the firefights I'd survived had been fed by my own family's greed. How many of my brothers in arms had died because of deals made in luxury hotel rooms. The knock at my door nearly made me jump. "Sergeant Harper," Director Vance's voice, "there's someone you need to meet." He wasn't alone in the hallway. Next to him stood a woman in her early 60s, silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, wire-frame glasses perched on her nose. Her eyes were sharp, analytical, the kind that could strip away bullshit in seconds flat. "Margaret Keene," she introduced herself, extending a hand. "But Maggie works fine. I used to track money trails for the Pentagon until I got tired of watching the bureaucrats bury my findings." "She's the best forensic accountant I've ever worked with," Vance added, "and she's been watching CDS for years." Maggie didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Those transfer documents you're holding? That's just the surface layer. I've mapped out the whole web. Shell companies, black market deals, falsified testing data. Your father built an empire on quicksand, and it's starting to shift." I glanced at the scattered papers on my bed. "Why show me this now?" "Because we're running out of time," she replied. "Friday's annual shareholder meeting is the cutoff. Your inheritance trust converts to direct ownership at midnight, 12% of CDS stock. If you claim it, you're legally tied to everything that comes next. If you don't," she let the implications hang. "I forfeit my entire inheritance," I finished, "and stay clean when this breaks open." Maggie's expression softened slightly. "Look, I've seen good people get dragged down trying to protect family legacies that weren't worth saving. If we move fast, you'll never need to share his." I picked up the photo again, studied my father's face, so confident, so certain of his right to play both sides. The same expression he'd worn tonight, sneering at my service like it was beneath him. "What exactly are we talking about here?" I asked. "What's the scope of all this?" Maggie pulled out her laptop, fingers flying over the keys. "Let me show you what 12 years of investigation looks like. Your father's not just dealing arms, he's falsifying safety data, bribing inspectors, selling to blacklisted buyers. The whole system is rotten, and it's putting soldiers' lives at risk." She turned the screen toward me. Spreadsheets, documents, surveillance photos, a digital paper trail leading straight to my father's door. But it was the familiar CDS logo on a damaged shipment of body armor that made my blood run cold. I'd reported those defective plates myself back in 2018. "That's enough for tonight," Vance cut in, noticing my expression. "We'll meet tomorrow to plan next steps. For now, process what you've learned. And remember, everything changes Friday at midnight." The next morning, Maggie spread her laptop, tablets, and stacks of folders across my father's mahogany conference table. The irony wasn't lost on me, using his own war room to map out his downfall. The leather chairs still carried that rich smell that used to make me feel important as a kid. Now, it just turned my stomach. "Let's start with the basics," Maggie said. pulling up a dizzying chart of corporate structures. CDS isn't just one company. It's a maze of subsidiaries, holding companies, and shell corporations. Your father designed it that way on purpose. I leaned in, trying to follow the spaghetti bowl of arrows and boxes. How deep does this go? 20 years minimum. See these dormant accounts in the Caymans? Her finger traced a pattern. They'd activate during major conflicts. Iraq, Afghanistan, anywhere with unstable governments and desperate buyers. Money flows in clean, gets laundered through about 6 layers, then disappears into private accounts. The numbers made my head spin. Millions upon millions, all carefully hidden behind legitimate-looking paperwork. I thought about my platoon scrounging for working equipment while these funds lined private pockets. But here's your immediate problem, Maggie continued, pulling up trust documents. Come Friday midnight, you're officially listed as heir to 12% of CDS stock. Sounds great, right? Except it also makes you legally liable for everything we find after that point. Any investigation, any charges, you'd be implicated. My throat went dry. So I either have to testify against my own father, or walk away and let your silence make you complicit. Maggie's eyes met mine. There's no middle ground here, Michael. She pulled out a flash drive next, hands steady but voice tight with controlled anger. This came from a source inside CDS's testing facility. You need to see it. The security footage was crystal clear. My father stood in the sterile white testing bay, watching technicians run diagnostics on a missile guidance sensor. Red warning lights flashed across their screens. But instead of ordering a redesign, Dad stepped forward, grabbed the certification stamp, and marked the sensor approved. That's from 3 months ago, Maggie said quietly. 2 Navy personnel were injured when that same sensor type malfunctioned during exercises last quarter. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I remember that sensor design. They asked for my feedback 2 years ago during internal review. I flagged multiple potential failure points, recommended against deployment. Let me guess, they deployed it anyway? I nodded, feeling sick. Dad said my overcautious military mindset was holding up progress, called it field-tested and ready. Maggie's fingers drummed against the table. We found similar patterns across multiple product lines, falsified test results, rushed certifications, ignored safety protocols, all to keep contracts flowing and profits high. She pulled up more documents, internal memos, inspection reports, profit projections. Each one showed corners cut, risks ignored, lives treated as acceptable collateral damage. The same pattern over and over, stretching back decades. Your father built this system piece by piece, Maggie explained, each layer of corporate structure designed to hide the one beneath it. Even experienced auditors get lost in the maze. That's why we need someone who knows where to look. I picked up one of the inspection reports, recognized my father's signature at the bottom. The date caught my eye, just weeks before a massive equipment failure had cost 3 good men their lives. Had that been connected to? How many other accidents traced back to this office? The clock's ticking, Maggie reminded me. Friday's board meeting is our chance to blow this wide open. But you have to decide. Are you ready to tear down everything your family built? I stared at the frozen image of my father on the screen, so casual about risking others' lives. The same man who'd sneered at my service, who'd seen honor as weakness, who'd built his empire on lies while sending me and countless others into harm's way. Show me everything, I said. Every account, every shell company, every falsified test. I want to understand exactly what I'm walking away from. Maggie nodded, already pulling up more files. Then let's get to work. We've got 3 days to unravel 30 years of corruption. The security footage of Dad's casual betrayal kept replaying in my mind as I dug through my old files. Remember those metal filing cabinets in your grandfather's study? The ones that smelled like tobacco and secrets? I'd stored everything there, every report, every concern, every piece of evidence I'd gathered about CDS's corner cutting. The body armor controversy from 2018 had its own thick folder. Talk me through what happened, Maggie said, settling into the leather armchair across from me. The lamp cast long shadows across the wood-paneled walls. It started with field reports. I pulled out the first document, paper worn at the corners from handling. Troops noting unusual damage patterns after minor impacts. Ceramic plates showing microscopic cracks that shouldn't have been there. I collected dozens of examples. And you reported it? Through proper channels first. My jaw tightened at the memory. Sent detailed findings up the chain at CDS. Got stonewalled. That's when I went to the Army Inspector General. Maggie nodded, already typing queries into her laptop. What month exactly? October 2018. Filed the official complaint on the 12th. I could still feel the weight of that decision, the certainty that I was doing the right thing mixed with dread about the fallout. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Interesting timing. Your father made some unusual transactions that quarter. She turned the screen toward me. See these payments? All to a private investigation firm called Sentinel Services. Started October 15th, 3 days after your complaint. The room seemed to tilt slightly. How much? 5 payments, $20,000 each. She pulled up another document. Sentinel specializes in corporate surveillance. Very discreet, very thorough. My throat went dry as I scanned the surveillance report dates. Every major meeting I'd had with the Inspector General's office was documented. Times, locations, who I'd talked to. They'd even photographed me handing over evidence files. He had me followed. The words came out hollow. My own father hired private investigators to track your whistleblower activities, Maggie finished quietly. The reports went straight to his private email account. I pushed back from the desk, needing space, air, something solid to grab onto. The weight of it all, not just the spying, but what it meant, pressed down like a physical thing. The armor complaint disappeared, I said. Internal review found insufficient evidence, despite everything I'd documented. Now I know why. Maggie's face showed a flash of genuine anger. He used the PI reports to stay one step ahead, knew exactly what evidence you had, who you were talking to, could control the narrative completely. I walked to the window, staring out at the estate grounds. The lake reflected moonlight like polished steel. How many times had Dad and I fished there when I was young? All those lectures about family loyalty, about carrying on the Harper legacy. What a damn joke. You know what kills me? I turned back to Maggie. He didn't just suppress the complaint. He actively worked against his own son to protect company profits. Chose money over both me and the troops who depended on that armor. It fits the pattern, she said, still scrolling through files. Every decision focused on protecting the bottom line, no matter the human cost. The familiar taste of Army coffee suddenly filled my mouth. That bitter morning brew we'd shared before missions, when lives depended on our gear working right. How many of my brothers and sisters in arms had gone out wearing compromised armor after my warning got buried? I dropped into the chair by the window, bone-tired. The estate lake rippled dark and deep outside, holding who knew how many other family secrets beneath its surface. Maggie's footsteps crossed the room, and I felt her hand rest briefly on my shoulder. You've got 36 hours left to decide what kind of legacy you want, she said quietly. I couldn't shake what we'd discovered about Dad's surveillance. The thought that he'd had me followed, documented, neutralized. It made my skin crawl. But something worse nagged at me, a connection I'd been avoiding. Maggie, I said, I need to check something in the Army files. She looked up from her laptop. What are we looking for? Incident reports. Specifically, my voice caught for a moment. Casualties linked to body armor failures. The filing system was familiar. I'd spent enough time filing similar reports myself. Within minutes, I had the relevant folder open. My hands weren't quite steady as I scrolled through the dates. Then I saw his name, Corporal Brent Briggs, KIA, March 2019. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Brent had been one of those guys everybody liked, quick with a joke, always volunteering for the tough assignments. He'd had this lopsided grin that could light up a whole barracks. Just a kid, really, barely into his 20s. 6 months, I muttered, checking the dates again. 6 months before they finally pulled that armor line. Maggie leaned in. What do you mean? Briggs was killed wearing CDS plates. The same model I'd flagged in my report. I pulled up the full incident documentation, though I already knew what I'd find. If they'd acted on my warning, the photos were stark in their simplicity. The first showed Briggs in better days, that characteristic grin on display as he lounged against a Humvee. The second was clinical, the damaged plate that had failed him, partially dissolved by some chemical reaction that never should have happened. The ceramic matrix was compromised, I explained, my voice hollow. Microfractures throughout the structure, exactly what I'd warned about. I could still hear Briggs laughing about his plans after deployment. He'd wanted to open a food truck, of all things. Said he made the best pulled pork sandwiches in 3 states. Now he'd never get the chance, because my own father had buried evidence that could have saved him. My eyes drifted to the folder icon on Maggie's tablet. Delete all evidence. One tap, and this whole ugly mess would disappear. The corruption, the lies, the betrayal, all of it gone. I could walk away clean, claim my inheritance, pretend none of this had happened. My finger hovered over the screen. A soft humming broke the silence, a familiar cadence that took me right back to morning formations. Maggie's ringtone. She silenced it without checking the call, her eyes fixed on me. "Your Corporal Briggs died wearing those plates," she said simply. No accusation in her voice, just the weight of truth. I pulled my hand back from the tablet, shame burning in my chest for even considering erasure. The cool night air called to me suddenly, and I pushed away from the desk. "I need a minute," I managed, heading for the French doors. Outside, the estate grounds stretched dark and silent under a quarter moon. I sucked in a deep breath, then another, letting the crisp air clear my head. The enormity of what we'd uncovered pressed down like a physical weight, not just corporate fraud anymore, but real lives lost. Good men like Briggs, who'd trusted the gear they were given. I thought about his mother at the funeral, clutching that folded flag, about the letter I'd written her, full of phrases like "died with honor" and "ultimate sacrifice." I hadn't known then that his death was preventable, that my own family's greed had failed him. Friday couldn't come soon enough. The shareholder meeting would be my one shot at exposing everything, at making sure no more soldiers died because of CDS's corner cutting. I owed Briggs that much at least. Standing there under the stars, I finally understood. This wasn't just about choosing between family loyalty and doing right. It was about who I was going to be when the dust settled, the kind of man who could look himself in the mirror, or the kind who turned away. Friday morning hit like a thunderclap. I adjusted my tie in the mirror, the crisp navy suit feeling strange after so many years in uniform. But this was a different kind of battle dress. "Ready?" Maggie appeared in the doorway, her own business attire trading her usual casual wear for something sharper. The steel in her eyes matched mine. "As I'll ever be." I checked my phone one last time. Vance's message was brief. Everything in place. Trust the process. The CDS headquarters lobby stretched out before us, all gleaming marble and corporate pride. Security waved us through, my family name still opening doors, at least for now. You ever notice how the moments before everything changes feel somehow slower, like the world's holding its breath? The annual shareholder meeting was being held in the main conference center, a massive room now packed with board members, major investors, and a small army of digital cameras for the livestream. Screens around the room showed the CDS logo floating serenely. Market tickers scrolled beneath, showing the stock still riding high. Dad stood near the podium, working the crowd like he'd done 1,000 times before. That familiar, confident smile, the firm handshakes, the casual power in his stance. He caught sight of me and Maggie finding our seats, but his only reaction was a slight narrowing of his eyes. I could read his thoughts clear as day. What kind of trouble could his wayward son possibly cause here, in his domain? The memory of those surveillance photos from 2018 burned in my pocket. He'd had me watched, had worked to bury my warnings about defective gear. Now it was my turn to watch him fall. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could begin." The board chairman's voice cut through the chatter. "Before our CEO's annual address, we have a special presentation from Director Thomas Vance of the Department of Defense." Dad's smile flickered for just a moment. He hadn't expected this. Neither had most of the room. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Vance took the stage, his measured steps and calm demeanor a stark contrast to the sudden tension. "Thank you for accommodating this last-minute addition," Vance said, adjusting his microphone. "In the interest of full transparency, I believe the shareholders should review some recently surfaced documentation before making any voting decisions today." He gestured to the tech booth, and the screens switched to video footage. The timestamp showed 3 months ago, a private board meeting. Dad's voice filled the room, clear and damning. "Of course I authorized the payments. You think those testing inspectors work for free? We needed those sensor certifications pushed through before the Navy's deadline. A few $100,000 in consulting fees is nothing compared to losing that contract." Someone in the front row laughed nervously, probably expecting some context that would make this sound better. But Vance was already switching to the next slide. Financial records, highlighted transfers, dates matching perfectly with failed equipment tests that mysteriously passed on second review. "Mr. Harper," Vance continued, his tone deliberately neutral, "would you care to explain these discrepancies to your shareholders?" Dad's face had gone rigid, that careful mask of control cracking at the edges. He started to step forward, probably to spin some explanation, but Maggie was already moving. "If I may," she said, rising with a stack of papers. I've prepared a more detailed analysis of the company's testing certification process over the past 5 years. She began distributing copies to the board members. You'll notice a pattern of irregular payments coinciding with equipment failures that were subsequently reversed. The room erupted in murmurs as people started flipping through the documents. I watched the color drain from Dad's face as he realized just how thoroughly we'd mapped his corruption. The market ticker caught my eye. CDS stock was already starting to twitch downward as the live stream carried everything to outside investors. "This is absurd," Dad tried, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "These allegations are completely—" "Your own words, Jack," Vance cut in smoothly, cueing another clip. "Perhaps you'd like to explain this conversation about the body armor testing protocols?" The screens flickered again, and I sat straighter in my chair. This was the part I'd been waiting for, the evidence that would link directly to Briggs and others who'd paid the ultimate price for CDS's corners cut and bribes paid. Maggie stepped forward with the kind of calm that only comes from absolute certainty. I'd seen that same steady focus in combat medics who knew exactly what needed to be done to save a life. Only this time, she was here to end something, not save it. "If we could patch into the market feed," she said, nodding to the tech booth. The massive screens split. Dad's incriminating video shrank to one corner while real-time NASDAQ data filled the rest. CDS stock still hovered near its peak, $187 per share, for now. Let's start with research and development valuations. Maggie's fingers flew across her tablet. Graphs materialized on screen, showing CDS's declared R&D assets over the past 5 years. The line curved upward like a victory flag. "Impressive growth," she noted dryly, "until you cross-reference the actual test results." A second line appeared, this one built from the raw data we'd uncovered. The gap between reality and CDS's claims yawned wider with each quarter. Someone in the front row whispered, "Jesus Christ." I glanced at Dad. His knuckles had gone white where he gripped the podium. $800 million. Maggie's voice cut through the murmurs. That's how much CDS overvalued its R&D division by falsifying equipment certification data. She split the screen again, showing the failed missile sensor tests alongside the doctored versions that went to shareholders. The same pattern appears with the body armor testing protocols that were flagged by internal review. The room had gone dead silent, except for the soft chimes of phones receiving market alerts. I didn't need to look at the screens to know what was happening. Investors were already dumping shares. The stock ticker's steady scroll had turned into a stuttering freefall. "This is outrageous," Dad's voice cracked as he tried to seize control. "I move to adjourn this meeting immediately for legal review." Motion denied. The board chairman's face had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "Continue, Ms. Keen." Maggie nodded and brought up the next slide, a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts that had taken us days to untangle. These entities were used to hide both the bribery payments and the actual R&D expenses. Note how they activate during key testing phases, then go dormant once certifications are pushed through. The stock hit $142 and kept dropping. Phones buzzed constantly now as major shareholders tried to salvage what they could. Dad swayed slightly, his usual commanding presence shrinking with each new revelation. I thought of all those times he'd lectured me about upholding the Harper legacy. Some legacy. "If you'll direct your attention to page 17 of your packets," Maggie continued, highlighting specific transfers, "you'll see how quality control failures were systematically buried using these channels. The missile sensor program alone shows 37 instances where failed units were recertified after suspicious consulting payments." "The board demands an explanation, Jack." The chairman's voice had hardened. "These allegations—" "Allegations?" Vance stepped forward again. "Every document in your packets has been verified by 3 independent forensic accounting firms. The SEC has copies, as does the Defense Criminal Investigative Service." $118 per share now. The screens couldn't update fast enough to track the collapse. I remember Dad once telling me that the stock market was like a confidence game. As long as people believed in you, the numbers would follow. Well, the truth was having its say now, and the numbers were running scared. "This is a coordinated attack," Dad tried, but his words sounded hollow, even to him. "These so-called documents are clearly fabricated." "Like the body armor test results?" I couldn't help myself. The words came out sharp and clean, cutting through his protests. "The ones that got Corporal Briggs killed?" That hit landed. Dad's eyes met mine for just a moment, and I saw something crack behind them. The great Jack Harper, brought low by his own lies. The stock ticked down to $97. "I believe," the chairman said heavily. "We need to contact our attorneys and the SEC." He turned to Dad. "Jack, I think it would be best if you step down from the podium." The screens kept flickering with endless red numbers, each one driving another nail into the coffin of Dad's empire. Maggie stood quietly now, her work done. The truth was doing the rest on its own. The boardroom's aftermath hit like distant thunder. Within 3 hours, black SUVs started rolling up our curved driveway, their government plates catching the afternoon sun. I stood at my old bedroom window, watching federal agents fan out across the estate's manicured lawn. Some part of me had known this was coming, but seeing it happen still felt surreal. Remember those movies where they lead the corrupt CEO out in handcuffs? It's different when it's your father. The agents were professional, almost gentle, a courtesy earned by Dad's political connections, I supposed. But their warrant folders were thick, and their faces showed no room for negotiation. Mrs. Chen, our housekeeper of 20 years, dropped a serving tray when they entered through the main foyer. The crash echoed through marble halls that had hosted senators and generals. Now those same halls witnessed Dad's slow walk of shame, flanked by agents who'd probably once waited for his signature on their department's contracts. I caught a whiff of his signature cologne as they passed, sandalwood and cedar, the scent of countless childhood lectures about legacy and responsibility. My stomach clenched. Dad's perfectly pressed suit looked suddenly loose, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. His face was flushed, eyes rimmed red, whether from anger or something else I couldn't tell. For a moment, our eyes met. I searched his face for, what? Remorse? Understanding? Some flash of the father who'd once taught me to ride a bike on this very driveway? But he just stared through me, silent, like I was another piece of evidence being cataloged and removed. "Sir," one of the agents said quietly, guiding him forward. The household staff had gathered in shocked clusters. Maria, the cook, was crying silently. Butler Jenkins stood ramrod straight, as if perfect posture could somehow maintain the illusion of normalcy. They'd served our family for decades. What would happen to them now? Another weight to carry. I watched from the grand staircase as they led him out. The massive oak doors, imported from some European castle, Dad always bragged, swung shut with a hollow boom. Through the beveled glass, I saw him disappear into the back of a vehicle. The same car that used to whisk him to Homeland Security briefings was now his prisoner transport. Hours passed in a blur of federal activity. I answered questions, signed statements, pointed agents toward relevant files. The sun set behind the estate's western wing, painting everything in stark shadows. Finally, the last vehicle pulled away, leaving only the chirp of evening crickets and the soft bubble of the courtyard fountain. I sat in my car in the circular drive, engine off, watching darkness settle over my childhood home. The dashboard clock read 11:58 p.m. Tomorrow, everything would change. The inheritance I'd been groomed for since birth, stocks, trusts, property, all of it tainted now by decades of fraud and corruption. My phone felt heavy in my hand as I opened the email app. The SEC execution address waited in the recipient field, stark and official. I thought of all those PowerPoint presentations Dad made me sit through as a teenager, explaining how I'd eventually take control of the family empire. "Blood runs thicker than water, son," he'd say. "The Harper name means something." Well, it meant something different now. I typed quickly before doubt could creep in. "I hereby formally decline any and all beneficiary claims to Collins Defense Systems assets, stocks, and associated trusts, effective immediately." My finger hovered over send as the clock ticked to 11:59. The fountain burbled behind me, a sound that had backgrounded my entire childhood. How many summer afternoons had I spent doing homework by that water, dreaming of making Dad proud? Now here I was, about to sever the last thread binding me to his world. The send button glowed in the darkness. One tap to walk away from billions. One tap to finally, completely break with the past. I pressed it. The confirmation appeared instantly. Declination received and logged. Just like that, I was no longer heir to the Harper fortune, no longer bound by blood to a legacy built on lies. The sun crept over Arlington's eastern ridge, painting the endless rows of white markers in soft gold. I'd seen plenty of sunrises here during my service years, but this one felt different. Maybe because I wasn't wearing my uniform anymore, just civilian clothes that still felt strange on my shoulders. The morning dew soaked through my shoes as I walked the familiar path to Section 60. My steps were slower than usual, weighted by what I carried. My silver retirement eagle in one hand, that worthless CDS stock certificate in the other. Funny how something can look exactly like money but be completely bankrupt of value. The air was crisp, carrying that peculiar Arlington silence that seems to demand reflection. A few early morning groundskeepers nodded as I passed, their quiet work maintaining this sacred space. The sound of my footsteps on the wet grass brought back memories of other mornings here, ceremonies, burials, quiet moments of remembrance. I found Briggs's headstone exactly where I knew it would be. The white marble gleamed in the growing light, his name and dates carved with perfect precision. Someone had left fresh flowers recently, probably his mom. She still came by every month, like clockwork. "Morning, Corporal," I said softly, kneeling down to brush some loose grass from the base of his stone. The marble felt cool under my fingers. I could almost hear his laugh, see that crooked grin he'd flash before cracking some horrible joke during mail call. Behind me, Maggie's car idled quietly in the parking area. She'd insisted on driving me here, but knew enough to give me space. The soft purr of her engine was the only sound besides the occasional early bird. I looked down at the eagle in my palm, that silver badge I'd dreamed about earning since I was a kid watching war movies. All those years of service condensed into a single piece of metal. With careful reverence, I placed it on top of Briggs's headstone, positioning it so the rising sun caught its wings. "You deserved better than what we gave you," I said, smoothing the CDS stock certificate on the dewy grass beside his stone. The company letterhead seemed garish here, out of place among all this quiet dignity. We all did. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I let it wait. This moment belonged to Briggs and all the others who'd trusted us with their lives. The weight of that trust, and how badly it had been betrayed, sat heavy in my chest. The rising sun warmed my back as I stayed kneeling there, remembering. Briggs showing me pictures of his new baby girl, teaching the newer guys proper radio protocol. That last wave as he headed out on patrol, wearing armor that should have protected him. "You know what you told me once," I said to his stone. "You said badges don't mean anything compared to the job we do. Guess you were right about that, too." A gentle breeze stirred the grass around the certificate, making the edges flutter like a flag at half-mast. In the distance, I could hear the first notes of morning colors beginning to play. The sound carried clearly across the hallowed ground, reminding me of everything I'd believed in when I first put on the uniform. "Honor's funny that way," I continued quietly. "It's like a wound that won't quite heal over, keeps reminding you it's there. Maybe that's the point." My phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. Probably Vance, following up on last night's chaos. The media would be having a field day with the Harper Empire's collapse. I could almost see the headlines, "Defense heir renounces fortune," or whatever dramatic spin they'd put on it. But here, in this quiet corner of Arlington, none of that seemed to matter. The morning sun caught Briggs's name, the letters sharp and clear against the white stone. My retirement eagle cast a small shadow across his rank insignia. Corporal, forever young, forever loyal to what he believed in. The breeze picked up slightly, carrying the faint scent of fresh-cut grass and morning dew. A few rows over, an American flag snapped crisply in the wind. My phone buzzed a third time in my pocket. Finally, I pulled out my phone. 3 messages, all from Vance. The last one had just come through with an attachment. "You're cleared, consultant," the text read. I opened the file, squinting against the morning glare. A new ID card filled my screen. Department of Defense Consultant, Department of Tactical Integrity. My name and photo were already there, like Vance had been holding on to this, just waiting for the dust to settle. The sight hit me harder than I expected, not because of the title or the access it represented, but because of what it meant. This wasn't just another government badge. This was Vance's way of saying the system could work, if the right people stood watch. I thought back to that retirement party, how differently everything had looked just days ago. The uniform I'd worn with such pride, the family legacy I'd thought I was finally making peace with, all of it built on shadows and lies. But here, among these quiet stones and morning light, something else was taking shape. A memory surfaced, my first day of basic, the drill sergeant explaining what integrity meant. "It's not about being perfect," he'd barked. "It's about being honest when you're not." Those words rang truer now than ever. The morning sun broke through a patch of clouds, striking Briggs's headstone at just the right angle. The marble seemed to glow, his name standing out sharp and clear. My retirement eagle caught the light too, its wings casting thin shadows across his dates. I stood slowly, joints protesting the time I'd spent kneeling. The dew had soaked through my pants legs, but I barely noticed. Looking down at that simple white stone, at the badge and stock certificate I'd left there, everything crystallized. "Badges rot," I said aloud, my voice steady in the morning quiet. "Honors the wound that won't scar over." I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.